Can we talk, like, you mentioned ATS here, and we were touching a little bit on it. Can we just talk about what ATS is and why that is relevant for you as a job seeker? Why should you even care?
You got it. Yeah. So 90% of companies use some sort of parsing technology to do a couple of things with your resume when you apply to a position. So most of you probably know your resume is not hitting an actual person until they go through the bots. So what an ATS system is doing is making sure that you're a good fit for the role. So what it's doing first is pulling out all the keywords from your resume and ranking you before you hit an actual recruiter. So you're going to either appear on the first, second, third, fourth page of a recruiter scan when they identify if you're a good fit for the role. So ideally, you want to appear on that first page. They're not going to necessarily go on to a third and fourth page. They're going to take the information from the ATS that is provided basically on how well you match the position and calling you based on that. So that's one thing it's doing. The second thing it's doing is attempting to read your resume. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but anytime that you use any kind of formatting, so funky formatting, colors, lines, columns, headers, footers, graphs, charts, tables, even lines, or pictures of any kind, all of that has the potential to garble applicant tracking software and make your resume unreadable. So you could theoretically automatically be rejected for a role solely on the fact that the ATS cannot read your resume. So if you've been getting a lot of automated responses, it most likely has to do with the fact that your resume is not applicant tracking software friendly. So you do want to make sure that you have a really boring resume. So
Visually.
Initially, yeah. So it's standard linear formatting, top to bottom, left to right, using a Word document, because some ATS is not sophisticated enough to read PDFs either. So it is to your benefit to make a really standard resume. And then when you're submitting your resume to an actual person, or you're networking or giving it to somebody, you can use that more stylized resume, especially for UX UI designers or front-end developers who want to show your skills on there. Save that version of your resume. Do keep it. But if you're organically applying to positions online, it is to your benefit to be as boring as possible.
This is mind-blowing to me. This is definitely news to me since I was around applying for jobs. It's basically search engine optimization for resumes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
This is bizarre. Oh, that's very valuable information, actually.
Yeah, it's extremely important. You would have no idea how many people get rejected from the ATS versus a person, even if they're completely qualified for the role.
And I also like to acknowledge, when you're using that general resume, that one template resume that you have for every single position, your resume will look a lot like other software developers out there. You have the same type of skill sets, you have the same terminology that you're using, so that job description really helps you to have those nuances and to make it specific to that role. Otherwise, even though you have all of those skills that are important in your field and in your specific, expertise, that's not going to put you high enough. That tailoring really comes into play so that you can be on that first page, like Ingrid said. And I even like to go past just focusing on those job requirements and the things that you'll be doing day to day, and look at the company as well. Look at their culture. What are they saying about themselves, even in just that job description? Because you can use your summary to then say, I want to be full stack developer at XYZ company. And once it gets to that recruiter, so you've tailored, you're on that first page, recruiter will see you. Then they see, oh my gosh, you tailored for my specific company here. I'm even more impressed with you. So that helps you to be even higher on that list once the human sees your resume.
And I think the flying fraction has a follow-up to that. Is there any truth to the idea that keyword stuffing by using white text and tiny font at the bottoms of your resume, does that work? Are candidates penalized? Yes. Yeah. So a recruiter will definitely know that you're trying to game the system, because once they take a look, why did this person have 100% match? And they take a look at your actual resume and your keywords are hidden in white font, that's going to automatically blackball you from ever applying to that position again, because there's going to be a note in your file saying that you tried to game the system.
And that does sound like it's contradictory to what we're saying. We're not wanting you to copy the exact job description. You want to pull from your experience and show that relevancy. Use their terminology if they're, using abbreviations or using the same skill, they mentioned it 15 times, you know that's important, and you want that to be listed on your own resume several times. Frequency comes into play as well. But you don't want to try to fool the system, because that does reflect poorly upon you.
And I see David mentioned that it's contradictory to how Matthias got his job at Spotify. So we're not saying be boring, just for the ATS be boring, but for your interview, for when you're giving your resume to somebody, when you're showing your work experience, when you have those ace in the hole things that will separate you from everyone, absolutely keep those. Those are necessary. But for organically applying to positions online, yes.
Yeah, like, it should be very important to point out that was in addition to a very boring application. I targeted I targeted a very specific position for a very narrow skill set that I had, and also listing blah, 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 I know these things. So it's very important to apply within the system, and then the creative things you do that as superfluous things on top of that.
And we're mainly talking about the look of the resume. It's going to look boring, but your content is obviously unique to you, and there is interest and excitement in that. And we just want to keep all of that relevant. So once you make it past that initial stage, you get that request for an interview. I always say at that point, especially for those of you who need that more creative resume to show off your skills, with your acknowledgement and your response saying, yes, I want this interview, send that updated resume or that more graphic and creative resume at that point, because you know it's going straight to that human. That's not going to block you or hurt you at that moment, and that helps you to gain that edge that you want.
Okay, I really love this question by Bunty Brew. This is a non-tech question. How do you deal with interview rejections? I was interviewing a lot in months of October, December. I had a lot of rejections, and in many cases I did everything right, at least in tech runs. Dealing with some of the rejections was hard, knowing the fact that I answered everything right. How do you deal with these kinds of rejections? I love this question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would point out your time period. So October through December, it's the fourth quarter of the year. A lot of hiring is not happening. So I think you're a victim of your time period. So recruiting is cyclical. So the best time to actually be looking for a position is in the beginning months, January, February, March, and the first quarter of the year. That's typically when companies have their budget in place. They know what their hiring goals are going to be. They have the money for it. When you get to the fourth quarter of the year, which is where you've been getting a lot of these rejections, money is not coming as through. They've already filled the roles that they have budgeted for, and a lot of rejections are happening. It has nothing to do with you.
This is most likely it has incredibly valuable. I had no idea about this. As a developer, you're completely off. I had no idea about recruitment cycles at all.
Yeah, it's extremely cyclical, and I really do believe that you're a victim of that fourth quarter. But in order to how to deal with them, it's really tough because, it can feel extremely personal. The best advice I can give you is that it's not. One thing I do recommend doing if you feel like you've been, you've gotten to the fourth round of interviewing and you made it to the last, what most likely happened is they probably hired internally, or they closed that position down completely. It probably was, they didn't even have the budget to even have that position in the first place, and something happened where they had to close down that position completely. But the emotional part of it too, what I would think about doing, there's some legalities around it, but I would think about asking for follow-up. Reach back out to the recruiter, or if you have the hiring manager's information or the people that you're interviewing, and ask for feedback. That's really valuable. If you did do something that could be fixed, they can give you that information. Sometimes they can't legally give you that, but it doesn't hurt to ask.
And it looks like SC Jinx UK just posted an article related to that and asking for that feedback and all of the benefits that come with that. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. And it's super relevant. But, also acknowledging it's just it's not you. And even when we're in those thick, heavy recruiting time periods, if you're still getting those rejections, you might be that second candidate. You were right there and someone else just had one thing on you, right? That still means that you are successful and you're doing the things that you should be doing. And while it's hard to stay positive in those moments, the fact that you landed that interview means that your resume spoke to them, your experience spoke to them. And, we were just lacking maybe in one small piece, or maybe it was a connection thing too. Maybe they already knew that person. Just like Ingrid said, so many times they already have someone in mind in the company, and you're coming in because you have to fill an HR requirement. So try to think about those pieces when those rejections keep coming. It's hard to get those over and over again. And we're here for that too. We provide that kind of support, even if it's just because you need some encouragement in your job search. It doesn't have to be, I have this specific question about this specific stage. It can be, I am so frustrated going through this and it's so hard. We are people that you can lean on with that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and rejection in general is a dreadful thing to deal with in all walks of life. And don't isolate yourself. Try to just reach out to friends and colleagues, and we don't talk about it, but everybody's been rejected from work. Most people have been fired at some point in their lives. Many people have we've been rejected from relationships. We've been have falling out with friends, and just don't talk with people. They will help you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, imagine your best friend that, or perhaps you touch on this. My bootcamp told me to keep a stats sheet pending, replied, rejected, non-replied. It becomes a stat sheet of who followed up, who hasn't.
It's great. That's great advice.
Yeah. And that lends to not, focusing on quality over quantity. Obviously, that's very hard to do if you're just sending one resume and blasting everyone. But when we have that more tailored quality document that you're using and you're having those more quality interactions, that means there's going to be fewer by nature. And that's something you can definitely keep track of. So I think that's excellent.
I think it's also, from an emotional standpoint, it also gives you a good reality check. Because whenever I feel bad in any way, my brain tends to make that a lot bigger in my head. So when I'm being rejected, it feels like I'm being rejected all the time. And it's really nice to just get actual facts instead of what your brain tells you in those moments.
Lizard Dan, I think this came up earlier too. Should I include links to my social media on my resume? So I would only focus on your LinkedIn. So in terms of your contact information, you want to include it all on your resume. So starting off with your city and state, if you're a local candidate. So city and state and zip code, that's for those of you who are in the US, followed by your phone number, your email address, your LinkedIn page, and then your GitHub.
Yeah, with the social media, it doesn't usually lend to your ability to be successful in the role. So that's, if it's not relevant to the position, then it shouldn't be on the resume.
Yeah, it's github.com, where you can contribute to open source work for those of you who are not familiar with GitHub.
I like this very specific question because I feel like it's sort of like, how long should I wait before messaging my date back?
Right.
Yeah. Can I ask an oddly specific question? How long should you expect to wait from receiving an offer letter to receiving a contract in NA? I recently moved from the UK and have landed a position. I'm halfway through my current notice period, and whilst my new company has been in contact, I'm yet to receive a solid contract, which I had by this point in the past, and plans for going out to see them. It's a remote job, but I'm meant to go on site for the first 3 weeks, starting in 3 weeks. Wow.
Okay, yeah.
NA, it's North America.
North America. Oh,
okay.
So I hate to say it depends, but it depends. so I can't get really hyper specific about what the time period is for most companies. Sometimes I've seen a turnaround of, going from the on-site interview to getting an offer within a week. Oftentimes it really kind of depends on who the people involved are. Do they need to get approval from the hiring manager? Did they get the paperwork signed by HR? Did they get that approved by recruiting? Did they get all that information and all that backup that they need in order to actually proceed with an offer? If you got a verbal offer, that's really great, because it's typically not going to be rescinded if you've received a verbal offer. They're just probably working out the paperwork on that end. But what I would do is follow up after a week's time. It sounds like it's been a little bit more than a week. So I would just shoot the recruiter an email saying, hey, I just wanted to follow up on our previous conversation. Looking forward to reviewing the paperwork. Do you have an estimated timeline of when I could receive that? So it's just basically following up with them and seeing if they need any additional information from you, for example, or when you can expect that. But I would follow up weekly until you get it. And it sounds like you're going to be starting in 3 weeks anyway, so it sounds like it's a matter of time before you receive that official paperwork. But I would follow up and ask just on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm.
Another front-end specific question. What do you think about the current framework scenario? Angular, React, Vue, and currently Svelte has started creating a storm. I started with Angular, getting comfortable with React. Many times I see framework-specific odds like React devs only, Vue devs needed, earnings, etc. As a front-end dev, I do not think this is the right way to deal. What's your views? Yeah. Like from my perspective, I have always gone with the route of being a generalist. I have never been stressed over like Angular, React, or Vue, or whatever is coming next, because I've always focused on core skills and understanding like what's a framework is, where a framework is coming from, etc. So I'm more of a building. If you can build a framework, you kind of know how they work, and like it's all the same thing every time. They're just different optimization engines, and there's very little paradigm shifts going on. And I mean, if you're a senior developer, you won't have the problem of them looking for specific skill sets. And if you are a junior developer and they're looking for something that it's oddly specific, and you just need to get that experience in, then I would say just like sit down and learn the framework for that specific case. Like learning a framework, if you have a good solid base, learning a framework is very trivial. It's just sit down and learn it. It's not all that complicated.
So I saw this question come up earlier. Imaginary best friend, how are perceptions on boot camps? Do they count as formal experience now?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, we have a lot of candidates who are going the boot camp route, and really, with your industry and what you're doing, it's all about can you do it or can't you do it. So if you can go through that and you've got that skill set and you can show that knowledge base that you have, then that's what's most important. And we are seeing that boot camps are being held at that same type of level for these roles. You have that education, you went through the classes, you completed it, and you know what you're doing with that. So I'm sure you can add more, Ingrid.
Yeah, and I say, like, let's say you just graduated from a boot camp and you don't have any other experience. So making sure that you showcase what experience you do have on your resume is going to be important. So developing a project section that's in lieu of your experience, because if you don't have it, you do want to include a project section to showcase your skill set, because that's an organic way to implement keywords and your skill set, and input that there, and also create a technical skills section. So that's going to populate as well. So you do want to highlight your experience that you do have related to your boot camp.
And I noticed you just wrote in again, imaginary best friend. Thanks for answering. I feel less useless now. And you are not by any means useless. And Matthias is a great example of that. Self-taught, super successful in making these things happen. So look at people like him. They've been doing it, and you have this boot camp as well to help you. So you are by no means useless, and you can make this happen.
You're doing great.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been like many of the most spectacular developers I worked with side by side at Spotify that were like way more senior than me were self-taught. It's by now, like I think that the most, like the bulk of the people working in the industry are comp sci, but I think it's important to remember that computer science is a very new field in academia. And when I was working for BlackBerry for a while, when they acquired a company that I worked for, and the people that were there, that had the founders and that had been there for ages, their background was physics, because that was the people that were doing computers, like before computer science and computer engineering existed. Then physics, that was the closest thing.
It's an odd question, but having been in a boot camp, have seen by Indeed tried working with boot camps yet? So we actually did a live webinar with a boot camp around a year ago this time. It was for Truffle University, which is a boot camp here in the US, where we basically answered questions regarding anything with their job search. So we have partnered with them. And then we do now allow just recent boot camp graduates onto the platform as well.
And we have a rep too that has been working with some different boot camps, and I think they're really trying to build that presence with the boot camps. So yes, that is something that we're an initiative that we're working on.
The real Python, hello, is lack of college as much of a disqualifier as it used to be due to automation? I hear more people are doing boot camps instead of college.
I've seen that too. I wouldn't say it's necessarily more than what we're seeing with degrees, but it's definitely becoming more prevalent and more popular. And I think that a lot of recruiters and companies are acknowledging it a lot more as well, just with the natural growth of it. So like we said before, it's about, can you do it? Can you not do it? Are you able to show off that skill set? And do you have projects that you can showcase if you don't have that experience quite yet? Also working with the career services in your boot camp, almost all of them, if not all of them, have their own career services department trying to hook you up with those jobs right as soon as you complete the program. So I would say, if that's something that's more appropriate for your current situation and more feasible for you, that's not something to shy away from.
And if you've been applying to positions online, you've most likely seen that a lot of companies aren't requiring the education section anymore. But if they are, that's where you can input your boot camp. But for the majority of the time, your experience kind of trumps your education.
Okay, musical bookworm. How should an experienced dev deal with a sparse GitHub profile? All my employers have been closed source, so I have a lot of experience, but almost nothing I can show a prospective employer. Asked earlier, but I think it got lost in a flood of comments. Sorry that we didn't see it earlier. Yeah. Okay, so is this a time constraint? I would kind of like to know a little bit more information there. I don't think a GitHub is super necessary to. If you have a sparse GitHub, that's okay. At least you have something there. I mainly include that for people who are kind of earlier on in their careers, where to show that you've been contributing to open source work in lieu of experience. But it sounds like you have a wealth of experience already. You can lean on that a lot. So it's not a requirement. It's not super necessary to have a GitHub, especially if you don't have the time to do that. Really focus on your experience at this point.
When I was reviewing resumes, I tended to go pretty quickly for a GitHub profile. But for me, it's more about, I want to see that the person has coded something without being told to. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that GitHub profile has to be like filled with open source project, but it's just nice to see like, oh, maybe they did like this little musical instrument thingy on their spare time, or they wrote this article, or they created this little app, and then they posted a code on it. It's like so I'm often not quite looking for quality in those cases, because for side projects and when you're doing things on your own, like you're probably not going to be like the best of the best quality we do, because you don't have a ton of time doing it, and you're also doing it for the fun of it. But just, I don't know, like just I'm looking for a spark when I go look for a Git, and when I click a GitHub profile. Yeah, a website or like a project or something that will always trump a GitHub.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for you that is new to the stream, I make a lot of sounds. Not as much.
Looks like Brenty Brew has another question here. So in May 2020, I will complete 4 years of graduation, and as I said earlier, that I have been in tech for 1.5 years. Many times I see people transition to managerial roles. What do you think about being a junior dev forever, always into creating stuff? Though I understand taking managerial roles are necessary, but still.
Oh, this is a good one.
Sure. So, if you're enjoying that individual contributor role and that's where your passion lies and that's what you're all about, there's no need to change that. If you start feeling that need to lead others and to hold that higher responsibility for the team, and you're wanting to make those higher decisions and having more of that impact on a group and that relationship with both the higher level and that lower level, being that advocate and that liaison, then by all means we want to start to explore that opportunity and that path. But there's nothing wrong with you saying, I like being a developer. I want to continue in, making my craft just better and better all the time. If that's your jam, go with it.
Yeah. That's a perfect response to that.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think that different companies are are differently abled to do this. I remember at Spotify we had a huge problem with that there was no career path as a developer. You were kind of like junior, senior, and then you either started becoming like a team lead or move to product owner or like some kind of architect weird role. It was very hard. People wanted something that allowed them to progress in their career and have because they were careerists, they wanted to be better, but they wanted to have that highly technical thing. So Spotify created a framework for diverging in different ways, and I feel like not all companies do that. A lot of companies will you're gonna be stuck at a salary level if you don't transition into a managerial role in some companies. Or am I completely crazy at saying that? Is that just my little worldview?
That's true.
I don't think you're crazy at all. Yeah, we see that too.
So I feel like it's different, if your company allows for it. But there's also different avenues in being highly technical. You don't necessarily have to start managing people. You can also start educating people. Somebody said if you're bad at coding, definitely take on the management role, or you can become a YouTuber. It's just figuring out what your skill set is. Fun for Function was born out of I read this random article by Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, and he said that finding your passion is a really bad advice, and he said instead that you should find what you have an unfair advantage over other people in. And I figured that the fact that I have a theater background and I'm a half decent developer and I have a video production background and I have some writing background made me into a very weird cookie. And if I could exploit all of those skill sets, then I could be something very, very special. So I think that it's more of thinking about, I'm a developer now, and I'm going to grow on that and my skill set, but what are the things that I have that can also broaden me and have a bigger effect and impact in the organization?
Do you want to talk about coronavirus?
I mean, it's on everyone's mind.
Okay, yeah, I think maybe we should address it.
Oh, why not?
How has coronavirus affected job seekers? Well, personally speaking, from Indeed, we've been on mandatory work from home for the last 2 weeks, and that has also affected hiring. A lot of it has been done remotely with candidates, which I'm assuming a lot of other companies are doing as well. So that's still in full swing. I think it's going to change a lot because you can't go on site to an interview.
Right.
So we're not exactly sure on the hiring process because that's not really our purview into doing what Indeed does in terms of acquisition for candidates. But the assumption is that they're still being conducted. I think they're just being postponed.
And, being in this industry, a lot of you have those remote interviews, those video conferences that you do. So that will still remain. And that's something that we're all comfortable with, which is nice. So that should ease some of that difficulty that maybe some other industries have where they need to have that in person for all of those interviews. Whereas with these positions, especially if you're applying for those remote jobs, that's going to be a big part of your interview process is doing that remote contact. So it's again varying from company to company. Some companies are going to continue on the path that they've already set, but I do think a lot of companies are going to be kind of holding off on those
making hires,
decisions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, COVID-19. We are now. It's now 5 o'clock, or depending on it's 5 o'clock in my my world. It's 9 o'clock Pacific time. So that means that I need to wrap up our stream to not go too much over time. This stream and this week we've been sponsored by Seen by Indeed, which is the company that Megan and Ingrid work for. It's a job search platform which is focused on matching and career coaching, and I would really like you to check it out at bseen.com/funfunfunction after the show. If you're looking at maybe finding some new jobs, and
even if you're not, we can help you.
And then the biggest thing for me, with that makes me happy about pushing Seen by Indeed as a sponsor, is the career coaching that you allow, that you do, and resume review, and all that kind of human support. And that is also why I asked Ingrid and Megan to come on here to show their expertise, and that this is not just some kind of templated thing. This is actual people that really know their stuff. And I'm really happy that you came on the show to share your knowledge.
Oh, we're so happy. Thank you for having us. It's been a blast.
Yes, thank you so much. We really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and if you want to reach out to Megan and Ingrid, you can find their emails in a little Twitch box, in a little box on Seen by Indeed box on twitch.tv/funfunfunction. And yeah, and that's it. I have nothing further. I hope you had a good time coming on.
Yes.
Yeah, we had a great time.
It was amazing. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your awesome questions and for being such hospitable guests and hosts and audience members.
Yep. I can only say the same. Doing these streams is such a balm for the soul. We're gonna wrap it up there. And thank you so much, Ingrid, Megan. Thank you so much, Seen by Indeed, for sponsoring the show. And until next Monday morning, stay curious. Bye.
Bye.